The book of Revelation was written to a fledgling church under tremendous pressure. The Emperor Domitian, who reigned from the year 90 to 95 AD, was the first Roman ruler in years and years to claim the divine title of Lord and God for himself and demand that all citizens in his empire swear loyalty to him by that name. Christians, as you imagine, refused to swear by that name, that title that they reserved only for Jesus. And so the blood of the martyrs was beginning to flow. Families were being torn apart. Friends were killed. Churches were split between those who had compromised and sworn loyalty to the emperor and those who had refused to compromise to the emperor. Faced with the threat of the first ever large-scale persecution of Christians, believers were questioning what their future would be like. Would their church survive? Would their families survive? Would they survive? And so John, exiled on the lonely island of Patmos, writes to encourage these believers to be faithful, to not buckle under the pressure of persecution. As we've seen throughout the book of Revelation, John uses symbols that his readers would have understood quickly, but which may be confusing to you and I. Now, the primary symbol of Revelation 5 is a scroll. Now, early church members would be very familiar with scrolls. They were very common in their days. But ancient scrolls only contained writing on one side, and the scroll here in Revelation 5 contained writing on both sides, the outside and on the inside. So we can tell right away that something is up, something is unique about this particular scroll. Now, the clue is found in Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 10, where the prophet was given a scroll that contained, quote, words of lamentation, mourning, and woe that were written on both sides in order to show the fullness of God's purposes in human history. So the scroll that John saw in the heavenly throne room represents the fullness of God's future events for the world. It is jam-packed with mysteries both wonderful and terrible. But notice that the scroll has another unique feature, and that is that it's sealed with 7 seals. Now, in John's day, a person's will was witnessed by 6 people as a safeguard against unauthorized opening. But in addition to these 6 people, there was a 7th critical person called the Familia Emptor, literally the family buyer. This person's job was to oversee the will of the deceased, much like an executor oversees the will in our legal system. The Familia Emptor acted on behalf of the deceased person by making sure that all of the terms of the will were properly carried out. He would be the one who, for instance, would appear in court, would pay any of the debts of the deceased, collect any obligations that were stipulated by the will. This was a critical job. Without the intervention of the Familia Emptor, even a father's own son could not inherit the estate. John's job was to help the heavenly court look for the Familia Emptor. And so Eldon, the angel, shouts out, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And they looked and they looked high and they looked low, they looked at heaven, they looked on earth, they even looked under the earth and in the sea, but no one was found. And so Revelation 5:4 understandably says that John wept bitterly, because without an authorized executor, God's purposes in human history would not only be unknown, but would be unaccomplished. Nothing in history would have any meaning unless John could find one who was worthy to break the seals of the scroll. Can you imagine that kind of frustration that he must have been on? For us, maybe it's a little bit like when you lock your car keys in the car, right? And you stand there on the outside, and you can see those car keys in there, and you're kicking yourself saying, oh, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I put those in there. But you can't get at the darn things. So it was with John. He can see God's plan for history, but neither he nor anyone else could unlock it. You can imagine the joy he felt then when one of the elders announces that he has found one who can open the scroll. Jesus is our familia emptor. He has the key that unlocks the divine plan for history. The Bible promises that God is sovereign and that nothing will escape God's providential rule. As someone once said, we may not know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. Jesus holds the key to history. He is the lens through which we view and judge and interpret all of human history. That's why John describes Jesus as a lion. Now, lions, of course, represent strength and majesty, intellectual excellence. But this lion in this text is even fiercer than normal because John describes him as the lion of the tribe of Judah. Here, John is comparing Jesus to Judah, Israel's most mighty military unit. The point is clear. Even in the midst of difficult and chaotic times, like John's and like ours, Jesus is the Redeemer who stands above and who judges history as a lion ruling over the jungle. But a strange thing happens next in John's dream. In one of the most ironic twists in literature, just as John looks up to see this mighty lion, he discovers not a lion, but a lamb. A lamb? Surely there is some mistake here. I mean, I have certainly seen lambs by the roadside, but they've never left me exactly shaking in my boots with fear or respect. In fact, I've eaten lamb, and we have a nursery rhyme about Mary who had a little lamb, right? But none of these things instills the least bit of respect or fear or awe in us, do they? Look closer at the text. This lamb has been slain and yet is standing. Jesus has been defeated and yet he is victorious. He was crucified, but death could not hold him. God raised him up, and now he has brought about not only his own victory, but also the victory of all people who believe in him. The lion is the lamb. This is the secret identity that John unveils before our eyes. The Emperor Domitian, who was threatening John's readers like a lion, is not to be feared according to Revelation. He and all earthly powers that demand ultimate allegiance but are unworthy of such allegiance have been revealed as frauds, as weak and vulnerable, mere mortals. They are just the latest tyrants in a long history of tyrants. Domitian and political egomaniacs like him have no true power. They are weak pawns in a sad play that repeats in history again and again and again. No, the Lamb that was slain has the true power. And God's wisdom, symbolized by the 7 eyes of the Lamb in verse 6, and God's power, symbolized by the 7 horns in verse 7, now consists not in coercion, but in the words of one commentator, in the, quote, invincible power of self-negating, self-sacrificing love. Self-negating, self-sacrificing love. That's where the true power lies. Do you believe that? Do you believe that self-negating, self-sacrificial love truly is invincible, unstoppable, that in the long run the way of love and justice is the way to go? The great German theologian Karl Barth used to talk about the omnipotence of God's love. The omnipotence of God's love. That's kind of an audacious claim if you think about it. Do we really believe that? Do we act as if God's love, fragile and vulnerable as it is, open to rejection, open to crucifixion, mocking and abuse? Do we believe that that way is nonetheless the most powerful force in the world? No. It takes some faith. It takes some courage, doesn't it, to believe that? And yet a cursory reading even of history shows that those who have selflessly served humanity by establishing a more just society, prophets like Martin Luther King Jr., whose vision of nonviolent social change that we celebrated on Monday, prophets like that have in the end done far more than all of the boots of all of the marching warriors, than all of the generals and all of the wars and all of human history have ever actually accomplished. So as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe may be long, but it bends towards justice. Coercion may at times be necessary in this world, but it is best a terrible necessity, an evil necessity. Love wins in the end, according to the Bible. And so we're left with that question yet one more time. Do I believe that self-negating, self-sacrificing love truly is invincible? I believe, Lord. Help my unbelief. Help my unbelief when coercion seems like the most expedient solution with my family, with my friends, even with my fellow Christians. Help our unbelief, Lord, as a nation, when war seems like the only option, the only way out of situations. Spit on our eyes, O Christ, that we can see the world the way you see the world and have revealed it in your word. You see, our healing begins with a new vision. And a new vision leads to a new way of acting, which leads to a new song, according to Revelation 5:9. The song begins small with the 24 elders, and then it spreads to the whole angelic host in verse 11, and finally it is picked up by every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth, according to 5:13. And in the end, all of creation joins together in full voice, singing out, "To the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain." Let's pray. Gracious God, heal our vision of the world. Uncover for us the true nature of reality. There is so much violence in the world, so much coercion, so many people who believe that this is the only way for us to solve our problems. And yet in Jesus the Christ, we have seen the Lamb that was slain being victorious. We have seen that love, that self-negating, self-sacrificing, hard, costly love changes lives, changes the world in a way that violence never can. Convince us, O God, of this truth. Grant us courage, O Lord, to cast our lot with those who walk in the pathway of the Lamb. For we pray it in Jesus, our Lord and Savior's name, now and forever. To him be the glory and honor and power